I just want to bring you inside to see our fall tour. We're out here on the porch. I have 100 pumpkins in our yard that we picked last week. And there's also a baby involved in this tour, so you might hear a little bit of him talking. And we're also doing some home DIY, so you'll see a little bit of destruction in the house too. But come on in and I'll show you all around. In the living room, I have some buffalo check pillows on the couch, some sunflower pillow covers that came from Amazon, and the middle pillow, the Home Sweet Home, came from TJ Maxx, and it looks like punch needle. I got that last year on clearance. On the coffee table, I have a big wooden tray filled with sunflowers, a vintage scale, sweater pumpkins, regular pumpkins, and I just put down a piece of black buffalo check fabric. On this little table, I have a stitched piece, a couple stitched pieces, both of them are Lizzie Kate's, an owl cookie jar and a cloche, and sunflowers, sweater pumpkins, berries, and vintage chickens. On the bottom shelf is a pumpkins for sale sign and a lantern. And both of those tables came from, the coffee table and the other table came from our Goodwill, and they were both, one of them was $3.99 and one of them was $6.99. And I need to paint them both, but I just haven't decided the color. I decorated the top of the curio cabinet with garlands of leaves, felt leaves, cotton branches, a thankful enamel sign, a vintage toolbox filled with hydrangeas from my yard, a couple of chickens, and a white pumpkin dish that came from Walmart last year or the year before. There's fall pillows on all of the chairs, and I think all of them came from Ross. So we're doing a DIY project, and it's been going on for a couple months. Board and batten on the stairs. The carpet got ripped off. We also took down the stair railing, which we're going to have a new one done. The stairs will be stained a dark color with the white risers and a carpet runner down the stairs, and the carpet's getting installed next month, so we need to hurry up and finish. But there's been a lot of coats of white paint on the board and batten walls, and the gray paint is new, and it's really coming together, but it looks a mess for right now. So that's how our foyer looks. In this green cabinet, I keep a lot of cross-stitch monthly pieces, and on top of it is the first punch needle that I did, and also another stitched piece, a vintage scale, and the coffee filter wreath that hangs on the mirror. Everyone loves it, and we still are going to do a tutorial. In the dining room, there's two huge vintage windows that hang on the wall. We found them at a flea market, took the glass out of them, and then I found two cotton wreaths at Hobby Lobby to hang on them, and they hang here all year long. On top of the hutch, I have a collection of vintage soup tureens in white, and two of them are even chickens that I've found thrifting, rummage sales, etc. In the hutch, there's white dishes, mason jars, pumpkins, dried hydrangeas, and even a chicken gravy boat. And there's also a garland of sunflowers that look very faded and fallish up on top of the hutch. The back of the hutch is filled with lots of fall things, sweater pumpkins, cross stitch, a fall sign, pumpkins, some owl salt and pepper shakers, a hydrangea from my yard with a pumpkin on top, and even a vintage cupcake pan with a cross stitch attached to it. On the dining room table, I have a crocheted tablecloth that's very old, and I folded it into 3 pieces to make a table runner, and added a piece of buffalo check flannel to the top, because when I went to get the table runner that was buffalo checked at Hobby Lobby, they were all gone. There's also a vintage enamel pan with a chicken sitting in it, and cotton branches and buffalo check bow stuffed in there with it. On the sideboard, there's 2 apple cross-stitch pieces for September, so I added some apples, and I found those at a church rummage sale, I think for like $1 for the big strand of them. Some white sunflowers, and then there's a couple vintage chickens, fox salt and pepper shakers, and a vintage chicken in a chicken wire cloche. There's a book page wreath hanging in the window, and also the newest Chalk on the Farm, my chalkboard to cross stitch collaboration with Hands on Design. And it's on the shelf. I have two vintage salt and pepper shaker set that are shaped like pumpkins, a little wreath with an enamel chicken on it, a sweater pumpkin, and a little vintage truck with a chicken in the back. Into the kitchen. On the wall there's a vintage shutter with a cross stitch piece for fall. On top of that are some white pumpkins. On top of the refrigerator cabinets there's some tins with chickens on them and a wooden box with dried hydrangeas and a white chicken. There's a vintage scale with a white bowl on top with a cross stitch piece and some fall leaves, berries, pumpkins. There's gourds from outside, a couple cow creamers, white sunflowers, and some fall berries. In this plate rack, I have 3 plates, and on top of them are some Ray Dunn pieces, some vintage chickens, a few fall gourd picks, some real fall gourds, and some vintage chickens. And then there's a plate that I found thrifting that has all kinds of pumpkins and corn and things that are fall. I love Ray Dunn, so I have a few of her canisters. And then there's a cake plate with a lantern that's one of those wax melters, so you can have the fall scent in your house all the time. There's a white platter that I found thrifting that's filled with pumpkins. There's a basket with fall berries, pumpkins, an urn, and a red chicken. On the end of the counter there's a wrought iron tiered tray that's got a vintage flour sifter with crocheted pumpkins, a leaf garland, real gourds from the pumpkin farm, sweater pumpkins, and there's little owl salt and pepper shakers and scarecrow salt and pepper shakers. In my kitchen hutch, there's chickens and Ray Dunn, and on top there's a rag garland that was made for Chelsea, and I both got them from our friend Rich in England. It was so nice to send them to us. On top are some chickens, a sunflower garland, cotton branches, a vintage galvanized bucket, cow creamers, and there's a wreath with the center cross stitch piece. And down on the back there's farm animals, another vintage scale, and a sweater pumpkin. On the shelf there's a tobacco basket that's made out of metal, a welcome pumpkin, a chicken and a happy fall sign, vintage mason jars, more sweater pumpkins, a platter that's a pumpkin, and a cross stitch piece that hangs on a tray. And then the tiered tray that sits on my kitchen table is filled with sweater pumpkins, mason jars, fall picks, owl salt and pepper shakers, fox salt and pepper shakers, a little chalkboard, buffalo check, and just everything fall that you could think of. Also on the wall is another chalkboard design that I drew and got turned into cross stitch by Hands on Design. This is the Chalk on the Farm, Sunflower Manor. There's a farmhouse sign hanging on the wall up above. And then a wreath with sunflowers hanging on the basement door. On the wall that goes into my family room for my kitchen is a chalkboard that is in a vintage frame that we found out rummage sailing. And I had a piece of wood cut to fit it and chalkboard painted it, and I draw it for all the seasons. And right now it's a scarecrow with his chicken friends, and he's out in a corn patch with pumpkins all around him. And I've heard that everyone wants it as a cross-stitch chart. You might just get your wish. You can see the kitchen all set for fall. And then into the family room. I found this hutch on Craigslist, and this is my first fall that I'm able to decorate it for since we got it last year, right when fall was ending. And I have a lot of vintage things, cross-stitch things, just anything fall. And the sign up on top, the pumpkin patch sign I got at Michael's. There's lanterns up there with flameless candles, Christmas lights entwined through the leaf garlands. There's a couple of cloches with sunflowers, an enamel pan that I found at a flea market, a little vintage picnic basket that I found at a flea market. And I love the hutch all decorated for fall. I made those little black buffalo check pumpkins. It's like one of my favorite places in the house to decorate now. It was a dark green when we got it, and I painted it with chalk paint and distressed it. Over on the end table or side table, there's a vintage window hanging above it with a fall garland and a pom-pom garland and some berries for fall. There's a couple of cross-stitch pieces and a You Pick pumpkin sign, a vintage chicken, a book page pumpkin that I made, sunflowers, sweater pumpkins, and more vintage chickens. The mantle has a big chalkboard that's in a vintage frame that I had a board cut to fit, and it's a truck full of pumpkins. On the mantle, there's a book page garland that's leaves that I made, a buffalo check and burlap garland from Hobby Lobby, a cotton branch garland from Hobby Lobby, and 2 strands of leaf garlands. There's a vintage scale up on top. There's a couple lanterns that are all decorated with fall things and burlap ribbons and chicken wire ribbons and sunflowers and buffalo check. There's a little piece of picket fence that sits on the side of the fireplace with a little chalkboard. There's dried hydrangeas behind my chair. And there's a lantern on the floor that's decorated with sunflowers and fall ribbons, cotton branches, with a flameless candle inside. That was lit. The batteries must have run out. The cow picture I found at Hobby Lobby, and I just love it with the black because it goes really well with the buffalo check curtains in here. There's a vintage chair in the corner with an old window, an old frame, and a wreath. And a chalkboard that is the chalkboard that got turned into cross stitch that was hanging on the kitchen wall. On the coffee table is an enamel pan with a chicken in it and a wreath of apples and gourds and pumpkins sitting on top of a burlap wreath. The table, Chelsea chalk painted that for me. It used to be a dark brown. On the vintage buffet, there's another tiered tray. This one is oval, and it's filled with cotton branches and a sign and chickens and sweater pumpkins, sunflowers, and a cross-stitch piece on the top. And then the chalkboard up above was an old vintage frame that I chalk painted the backing on it and drew a mason jar with sunflowers in it. There's a vintage truck that my neighbors gave to the grandsons that Grandma's borrowing. And a pumpkin with another cross stitch on it on top of a vintage scale. There's a raffia or corn husk wreath hanging on the door that's really, really old that I bought at a craft show a long time ago, and it's kind of faded, but I like it, so it's up. And there's another cross stitch that was a chalkboard that I drew, and this one was in the Just Cross Stitch magazine, and it's the fall seasons in chalk. Thank you so much for dropping by to see our home all decorated for fall. It's so much fun to decorate, and I'm glad that I can show it to you. And we'll be back hopefully in a couple weeks with a Halloween tour. And maybe I'll even have carpet on my stairs by then. But thanks so much for stopping by.